We are. They're recording everything this year.
Yeah.
And then there's that thing.
Yeah, that's the backup recording.
Oh, that's just backup
recording.
Yeah, they should be streaming, and I was told the streaming's working. So.
Yeah, and this is, oh, really?
Actually, if anybody has a laptop that they want to set up in the hallway to stream into the hallway for the people who are waiting out there, that'd be good.
That's a neat idea.
I'm going to try it after lunch. I'm going to try to get that set up. So, do you want to introduce this since you're the moderator?
I'm just going to let, I'm not the moderator.
Who's the moderator?
No, Amanda's the moderator.
We'll introduce Amanda as the moderator.
You can introduce me so I can introduce you. I can introduce myself.
Bradley
We're
can
supposed to
introduce
start at
Karen.
1, right?
What's that?
We're supposed to start at 1 right now.
Okay, what time is it?
2 minutes.
We've got a 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. Okay. So you want me to introduce it? I have to introduce the other two talks. I tried to make
we need to
Fontana, but he just ran out of
Yeah,
the
do we need to introduce?
We need to, we'll introduce ourselves, Bradley. Don't worry, we'll introduce
Why don't you
ourselves.
introduce yourself, Ryan? Because not everybody here knows who you are.
You could go in rounds introducing
Everybody, I was just thinking that will take some of the pressure off. We might just
Pretty
do
much what
that.
we're doing.
Okay, I think,
Well, you're all right. Do you want to start now? It's a little early, but you can.
oh, is it early? Okay,
There's still
mine.
people.
come that it is
There's like five somewhere.
it's like
Raise your hand if you have
still with
this.
it.
thing that somebody
Thank
introduces
you.
somebody else.
The hands up are where seats are.
Yeah, well, I think it's that, like, if you're a very important person, then everyone should just know who you are. So the idea is that, like, somebody else introduces you so that, of course, everyone should know.
Don't you know who I am?
Clearly.
Kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal.
The guy at Fosdem who wasn't in the room.
Remember the whole big thing around the thing?
Aren't you that guy from Oracle trying to sell me a license?
My favorite is, oh, are you Karen Carpenter?
Ah, that's nice. I like that. I like that. I'll introduce you as that.
No, thank you.
Long dead. Okay, they're standing. That's bizarre.
I don't know why the room tends to be.
Good, yeah. Thank you.
Should we
Empty
go?
seats, raise your hand again. If you all want to just quickly, before we start, walk back here. Is that okay before we start?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Like 2 or 3 people go this way, there's seats on the other side. You go ahead around if you want before we get started. Alright. Okay, ready to start? Okay. So I'm Bradley Kuhn, one of the co-organizers. Tom Marble in the back, the main organizer of this track who does all the work. This is Richard Fontana, one of the organizers, and Karen Sandler, who's on the panel, one of the organizers. And with that, I'll hand it over to the moderator, who will tell you what this is about, Amanda Brock.
Thank you. Thanks, Bradley. Can you guys hear me? Because I'm quite quiet and quite short, so I'm standing up and I'm hoping you can hear me at the back. Yeah? No? Yeah? Ish? Okay, I'll try and be louder. Does that help? So I'm Amanda Brock. I'm ex-GC at Canonical. I was 5 years working with Canonical on Ubuntu, and I now work as a lawyer in private practice in the UK, mainly doing open source advice, whether for companies that aren't really open source or open source companies. I have 3 other people today with me in the panel. Karen Sandler, who's Executive Director at the GNOME Foundation and used to be GC at SFLC in New York. John Sullivan, ex-Executive Director at FSF. And Jeremiah Foster, who's Community Outreach at the Geneva Foundation, Automotive Foundation for Infotainment Systems. And I'm really glad that the room is so full, because this session is not really going to be about us talking to you, but us looking for your feedback and discussion. So it's going to be a bit more of a round table than maybe you expected. So I'm glad there's a lot of you to contribute. What we have been participating in, some of us anyway, through an organisation called the European Legal Network. Bit of a misnomer, because the European Legal Network is just a network of lawyers who work in FOSS globally, covers people from Asia to Australia. And we've set up a special interest group looking at security critical applications and how FOSS fits into that picture. The group, the special interest group, is vendor neutral, it's international, and it's looking to produce some white papers over the next few months. And the white papers will be aimed at a mixture of lawyers, policymakers, developers, and people in the automotive industry and medical sectors. Other areas where security critical applications have profile or importance. And what we would like to achieve, which is why I proposed this session, is to get some development community involvement to make sure that the solutions that we're suggesting as lawyers actually work. Because what I've found when I've dealt with companies that have security issues is that they often have lawyers who have no clue at all about FOSS. So their natural reaction is often to say no to anything that's proposed to them, which is a bit of a pain. And then stage 2 is asking them what it is they're really concerned about, and they'll wave around terms like product liability, data privacy. They might even say strict liability, but then when you ask them to reference the statutes that they're concerned about, they don't give you anything. So what we're hoping is to be very collaborative, to work in a mixture of a development community, legal community, and any other interested parties, and to get as much information together as we can. There isn't a URL or anything I can give you, but if anybody at the end of this still is interested and wants to participate, if you can either identify yourselves to me before you leave, or I guess maybe Richard, we can put a contact up on the website or something afterwards. Can we do that? Yeah. Because we don't have slides, and if we feel afterwards that you needed something in slides that we haven't given you, we'll also put slides together. So I've said more than enough, and I'm going to pass you over to Karen Sandler.
I'm gonna stand up too, I think, because it's kind of weird sitting down. Like,
we're low, aren't we?
Yeah, we're really low. I am the executive director of the GNOME Foundation. This area is like the weird intersection of my my professional and my personal life. I am a patient with a medical condition, and I have an implanted pacemaker defibrillator. So I literally have proprietary software connected and screwed into my heart. So it's a bit odd. And as a lawyer in free software, and then and as a software freedom advocate, and now as the executive director of the GNOME Foundation, having that experience has made me extremely passionate in my advocacy, and I think it's incredibly important. And it also gives me a way of talking about software freedom that is, I think, a little bit unique, because when I get up in front of a group of people and I say, I have a big heart and I am very likely to suddenly die, it makes people sort of think about their software in a different way. When you say my life relies on my software, and when I get people to think about the software on medical devices, then they start thinking, I can say, well, what about cars, and what about voting machines, and what about all of the society and life critical functionality, and and a lot of the issues related to all of these things are united, which is why we're all here on this panel. I confess I did not actually know about the SIG until this panel, so I haven't been involved in that at all. So the views represented there are I think only half the panel has participated in that so far. So I just wanted to be a little bit clear about that. What else?
And we're not even at a stage where we have views. We're just trying to work out what the issues are and looking for some help to do that.
So I find that a lot of the issues related to the area of medical devices are common to these other areas of safety critical devices, and I look forward to discussing them more.
I'm going to stand up, but I wanted to look at my screen for a minute, so I'll stay here. So I'm the executive director at the Free Software Foundation, and I will shock and surprise you by saying that we think that our copyleft licenses are excellent in contexts that have safety and security concerns. We think that copyleft is an important policy to follow there, just as in other software contexts. And the place where that tends to get brought up the most in devices that can cause people harm and cause lots of damage is in the question of whether users should be able to modify the software on the device themselves and install a new version. And it's kind of a funny question if you think about where it comes from, because especially if it's in a case where you have, let's say, a car manufacturer that wants to use free software in the car themselves. They want to ship, for example, the kernel Linux on a car computer system, but then they want to stop the user from modifying it because that might be dangerous. Well, they want to use the kernel because the kernel is awesome. How did the kernel get to be awesome? The kernel got to be awesome by lots of people, anybody, being able to modify it and contribute improvements. So it's sort of like we've enabled the freedom to modify in order to build the software which we can now use in cars, and that's awesome, but we're now going to kick the ladder away while we're still standing on it and make sure that that software can't get any better through that same process. So that's one important concern that we have. And a second one is just whenever you talk about safety and security, you have to ask for who. And true safety and security in any situation comes from the person worrying about their own security and being able to actually address threats to their security. And too often we're given security measures in a lot of contexts that actually are looking out for another entity's security who has control over the user. So you have a car company preventing you from modifying your car because you might make it less safe and sue them if you have an accident. Well, what if you want to go to another car computer mechanic and pay to have extra safety features added yourself, right? That's something you can't do if the system is locked up, and that's something that is in your interest, in your security interest. Or you have, in 2013, security researchers wanted to present a paper about a vulnerability they found that would, in the electronic car key system, that would allow people to break into lots of luxury cars like Mercedes and such. Those companies got a gag order against the security researchers to prevent them from disclosing that vulnerability in public. So all of the car owners then were under a security risk that the car companies were not protecting them from, and they couldn't do anything about it themselves because they weren't even permitted to know about the problem or modify the software to fix it for themselves. So those are what we think of the main concerns that we have when we talk about it. We think modification is good for security, and we think that modification is, a fundamental freedom also in order for to people to be autonomous, just as it is in any other free software context.
Hi, I'm Jeremiah Foster. I don't have the legal background of these guys. I come much more from the free software background, a technical background. But I think that this forum is really important. I think most of us here are probably software authors or writers or involved in some distro. The safety critical devices, safety critical license SIG, is a great place, I think, for us to learn and discuss how licenses, particularly strong copyleft licenses, affect our software. Obviously, free software is moving into areas that it hasn't been before, and safety critical stuff is going to be much more important. I don't know how well we address that today. I would expect that this forum and this SIG would get a lot of cooperation from everybody in this room, and that's what I'm here today to do, to just exhort people from sort of the Debian duocracy approach. It's really incumbent on everybody here to ask these tough questions. These folks, many of them have, they're lawyers, legal backgrounds, they're not afraid of it. So we need to start discussing this because it's really, really important, and free software is a great opportunity to save a lot of lives. In the United States, I think over the last 10 years, more people died in auto accidents than died in the war in Iraq. This is a pressing issue, and we can make a real difference with our software, so I would expect everybody to join in here and try and come up with some solutions for the best approaches.
So, over to you guys. Short and sweet from us. Does anybody want to kick off with some participation? Yes, sure. Can you speak up? It's really hard to hear.
I had a question that came when you talked about the car issue, where they're going to add features and so on. What about the warranty?
The warranty?
About if the user changes it, how the manufacturer can be liable for an issue that maybe from this or not? What about this?
So, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question, I think, is that if you have a warranty with a vehicle and someone then modifies the software, what will happen to the warranty? How can it remain valid?
So that's one of the core concerns I think that a lot of manufacturers have. And at least from our approach, GPLv3, for example, says explicitly that you're not required to continue to provide a warranty when in a situation where someone has modified the software themselves. So that's one piece of it, but there's other.
I used to work for General Motors as a lawyer nearly 20 years ago, and I used to draft warranties, extended warranties, that kind of thing. My view on that is you're right, it's probably void, but changing your software, modifying your software is not any different from using unauthorized parts or parts that aren't covered by the warranty. So why are we concerned that that's different from any other replacement part in a car? Karen, were you going to?
Well, I was just going to add to that I think that, that freely licensed software is a bit of a red herring in terms of these issues, because, it's extremely naive to think that proprietary software is not modifiable. And I think we've seen that in the exploits recently, the Prius exploit, which is awesome. If you guys have not seen the Prius exploit, go take a look at it. It's amazing, and it's really effective for advocacy when people say, if we release our software, then it becomes less secure, and you're vulnerable to people modifying. It's like, No, our software is vulnerable, period. And so I think that sometimes focusing on the issues related to, sort of saying, oh, freely licensed software is problematic is totally a red herring. I just wanted to throw that out
No,
there.
I think that's a really good point.
Yes, the problem that I see there is how would you distinguish in the case of warranty between something related to you changing the software, whereas some, I don't know, hardware breaking in your car, like a tire breaking,
Yeah.
just because it's badly manufactured. How would you go about the manufacturer not saying, well, we know that it's about the tire, but technically you changed your software, so that voids the warranty, so we don't have to. I don't know if tire is a particularly good example because that's
Yeah.
probably not by the
Yeah.
car manufacturer, but I think you know where I'm aiming at.
I do.
They take a tire pressure sensor in the truck.
Jeremiah, do you want to say something?
Sure. I mean, there are right to repair laws. So in some instances, you have the right to change your tire on your car. Maybe a free software license would also ensure that you had the right to repair the software on your car to make it more safe.
Okay.
So I don't think it's so cut and dry. I mean, if you void your warranty here, that's not that big a deal. You're out a few €100. If you void a €30,000 car, that's a big deal, and somebody might be willing. I think it's very different. I think you might find there's more gray legal area than that.
The main area, and it happened because I checked it recently. I think it's General Motor who had a problem with their hybrid cars were consuming too much, and they upgraded the software all around the world to have better ignition. And the problem is not the car itself; it's the insurance to the car.
That's what I was
Because
gonna say,
it
yeah.
can give damage to other people, and the
Yeah.
damage to the other
Yeah.
people can go way beyond the price of the car.
Yeah.
So the insurance company refused to insure that car with the upgraded software.
They could, they can manage it, but there are companies, and you need to be, if you speak about cars, there are companies who have a certification to do it, and if you are not certified, you're all closed, and your warranty is
Yeah.
not only void, but insurance is void, so you're responsible for everything.
Right. So I think what we're saying.
Because how you prove that you changed the program in your car and your car is still functioning properly and won't cause an accident.
I think there's a much wider class of these issues. So you're really now talking about effects of others, about basically things you have in the comments. We've got things quite similar in my company, just both as automotive, with things like tire pressure sensing, but also like with communication, where you think of GSM network, certain certifications required, not because it's the software so good. Or
Can you speak up? I can barely hear you when you're facing me.
So we've got something quite similar in my company with things like tire pressure gauges, but also with GSM software. So the software there is certified and protected and legally controlled, not because it's so great. In fact, it's absolutely total shite. But it's because effectively, if it goes wrong too badly, you're not taking down the GSM cell just for your own
Yeah.
phone. You're taking it down in a very large swath of.
So shouldn't the certification test suite be open then? I mean, shouldn't that be the approach?
So I understand. So we sort of like see something similar, sort of like now happening in our medical space as well, right? Where we've got two classes. One is like MRI equipment, X-ray equipment, where there's absolutely, as long as a doctor is present, there's absolutely no certification, there's no control. Doctors modify the software on those devices completely themselves. There's absolutely nothing except when there's something like a nuclear element in there. There's a little bit of it. And then we've got the other class, which is given to a patient, where the patient does something to themselves, which is controlled, like prescription medicine or something, where all of a sudden it's certification galore. But in all of those cases, there is that effect that you're mentioning,
Yeah.
the insurance of the commons. So as soon
Yeah.
as you cross over in that, I'm damaging the commons, then all of a sudden, even though it may be crap,
Yeah.
you're running out of software may have problems.
So I think what we're saying is that there's an issue that we need to deal with in the white papers, and it may be that that issue won't be the same across every country, and we have lots of people participating from different places, and the issues around TiVoization, I guess, where you can't lock down the code, there has to be the ability to modify, and if you have that ability to modify, you're not controlling it by saying that the person who's modifying is certified or authorised by the car manufacturer or whatever manufacturer it happens to be, and that the risks there are that you void your insurance, so there's going to be and your warranty, and there's going to be questions about diagnostics and what we lawyers call causal change, so showing that something's arisen directly from the impact of changing the software, and that the liability and the risk isn't just that you're going to mess up your car and you've lost all your money in your car because it's gone wrong, but that there's a safety element here, and that safety element means that you're driving a vehicle, and if the vehicle goes wrong, I know one car manufacturer has said to me, suddenly the infotainment system, the audio system goes loud, you put your foot down and you crash, you kill somebody. You know, there's a genuine concern for life as well as a financial concern on that whole safety piece.
So simpler, right? So why don't we let a 30-year-old drive or vote? Well, because we don't quite trust them as society, right? And in a way, we're sort of like extending this now. Like, why don't we let someone tinker with their software? Well, because we don't trust them. I'm not saying that this is quite justified because the software is generally quite bad, but there's a similarity to the two arguments.
There's an important difference there in who the we is, though.
Right,
so,
of course, yeah.
So this is when you start talking about using software to enforce laws by prohibiting all modification of the software, then you get all sorts of nasty side effects. So I wanted to squeeze this anecdote in real quick. I didn't know if any of you have how many of these some of the car safety features on the computers you run into yet. Because I don't have a car, and when I did have a car, it was very old, so this is all kind of new to me. But they do things like when you start to go over 5 miles per hour, a few kilometers per hour, you can't type on the screen anymore, right? It won't let you. And my first experience with this was when somebody else was driving the car, and he'd just gotten it, and he started moving forward and tapping on the screen trying to figure out why it wasn't working, and it almost caused him to hit something because he was so distracted. So it's, what seems to be a safety feature can backfire, and when you're not able, when you're locking down an entire system in order to enforce some things that are actually laws, I think we're much better off looking at outcome-based tests to verify that whatever's been done to the car, it still works, the way that it's supposed to.
So just before I take those questions, are people comfortable talking about GPL3 and Geneva and decisions around that? Is that something maybe we could discuss a little bit? Because I think that's driven by TiVoization, isn't it?
Sure, I'll take any responsibility for saying something I shouldn't say. I think that there's some people who are cringing in here. I think in general that most car companies would not accept a GPL v3 licensed software module in their car. And that doesn't represent Geneva, I just think that represents most car companies.
Yeah, so related to the insurance part, so one thing is indeed what you lose if you change your software, but maybe you can give us a brief overview if you know about that. So in which country is it illegal to merely modify the software of your car, for instance? So I guess there are two levels. At one level, you do something and you pay the consequence of it in terms of losing warranty or whatever else. But in some countries, I guess it will be illegal just to modify the thing.
This is a great question, and I've asked multiple people who work for automotive companies exactly that, and they haven't ever been able to give me a statute that says you cannot do this. Now, whether that's because they don't want to share or haven't in the situations wanted to share it with me, whether it's because they don't know, or whether it's just lawyers overreacting and fussing and saying, oh, this is illegal. It's one of the things that instigated this group and these white papers. We cannot get the hard fact answers, and we're trying to engage lawyers in the automotive sector as well as medical, in the hope that if there are genuine and real concerns and actual statutes, they will tell us what they are, and we will try and help with the development community build solutions that get us around it. I think the reality is probably going to be that there aren't any laws prohibiting it, but there are internal policies within those companies which may be for very good reasons. And that's
and
what we need
laws
to
might
get.
be general liability that where you're interpreting. Part of the problem with our space is that in a lot of the areas, a lot of licensing, a lot of legal issues that come up as address free software do not have directly applicable case law in common law countries.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at the case laws and we're imagining how other people might interpret them as it relates to a completely different situation. And that means that some lawyers interpret it one way and other lawyers interpret it the other way. And so, asking show me a statute isn't necessarily the way to get the,
Show me a statute, give me a case, give me a line of precedent, show me what you're applying, because this strict liability piece, which is often what the lawyers in those sectors do bring up, do have statutes, and product liability does have statutes. So on the statute side there is a base. In terms of applying existing case law, it's always going to have to be a bit loose.
So how about Europe?
Yeah, I think in Europe, if you search for Artemis and Vetus in find 2012 review of all the European countries, which is very exact about what statutes.
Okay, great. What did you say? Artemis and
Vitis.
Vitis. Okay.
Unfortunately, the answer was very, very unsatisfactory because, of course, the laws will say like things should be safe.
You seem to know more about this than any of the lawyers on the SIG, so maybe you should join it.
This was actually a European Commission piece of research, which my company happened to be involved in.
Yeah.
Which basically was exactly that. It was only for automotive.
Yeah.
And in the end, it only focused on the hard parts, such as tire pressure in trucks and a few other areas. But that will give you a very
Yeah.
complete
Well,
list.
please, no, seriously, please give us the information, even if you don't join.
Yeah, the answer is going to be very unsatisfactory because, of course, in most countries, statute says it should be safe.
Yeah.
Right, and then there are all sorts of things which aren't laws but are usually very expensive stamps you have to buy.
And that's going to be a question of risk, which is why we need to understand better what the laws are, so we can input solutions that help mitigate the risk.
I mean, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, if we can't demonstrate the benefits of freely licensed software in these applications, and and demonstrate that the fears about them are often unwarranted when compared with proprietary software solutions, then those lawyers are never going to make the risk analysis in our direction. Lawyers will. I speak as one. Lawyers will never say yes. They'll almost always say no unless they're pressured or compelled by some business reason to do otherwise.
Exactly. And I think what we need to do is show the value and actually show the solution. Sorry, you're trying to ask at the back there.
Sorry.
Just one behind you.
Yes, well, I believe that there could be some reasons, different reasons why it would be illegal, as Stefano said, that it's illegal to modify the software of the car. It could be generally by law, but it could be that if you do it, your car isn't, you can't use it anymore in public roads because the certification or what it is invalid.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
You're allowed by law in general to modify your software, but after doing it, you can't use your car in a public street.
Right.
You are allowed to modify, but not use. It's like
Yeah.
you can have a rifle, you
Yeah.
can modify it, but you can't shoot at someone.
Yeah. Okay.
That's someone.
So you can sell, trade, but you can't use it.
So, and this
Yeah.
is a notion that's addressed also in GPL v3, because I think you have to have some room for that, but it's obviously also something that can be abused. But GPL v3 acknowledges that if the modification causes harm to the network in some fashion, then you can keep the device off of the network. So there are some analogous things there probably with what we're talking about.
So, gentleman in the brown hoodie.
Yeah, I just want to say that in many of the things we discussed.
Can you speak up a little bit? Sorry, it's just very hard.
I just want to say that many of the things we discuss here it's not a new thing because I think the car have been a very popular object for modification from the dawn of the car. So it have been historically been mechanical modification. But if you go and buy a magazine of a car, in the 90s you find a lot of articles how to start to modify the software and then the software start to control the car. And if you search on the internet you can find a lot of stuff about how that the reverse engineering of the controlling software and things. So that's the electronics.
There is chipping your car. You can get a chip and change the fuel mixture, for example, to make your car go much faster.
Yeah, so
but when your Porsche starts spewing black smoke, you may decide that that's not the greatest thing in the world. But chipping your car is not the same as having free software on the car. I mean, the car companies are the ones who are looking at putting free software on the car. So they have to examine the license and see if it's correct. And if they balk at the GPL v3 when many in the community think GPL 3 is a very good license for the car, what do we respond? I mean, we really need, the free software community really needs to be able to defend the use of these licenses in safety critical systems. So that's the question, not just the mechanical chipping.
But the thing for the vehicle authority and countries and for insurance companies, they have dealt with this kind of problem or whatever for a long time.
But it doesn't sound like the insurance companies really understand also the value of safety critical licenses using free software licenses. I mean that.
I challenge it. If you go to trucks, it's extremely well understood how aftermarket upgrades to trucks and things can enhance safety, reduce your premium.
In commercial trucking, there's not a lot of use of Linux. You know, a lot of that is at the microcontroller level, or there's proprietary real-time operating systems. It's very, very recently that Linux is coming into commercial trucking. FMS, there are standards, but those are standards agreed on by consortia. The automakers are very good at working together. They're very good at managing their supply chain, but they're not as good as keeping up with the pace of commercial software. And Linux is coming in there in a big way, and all of a sudden it's GPLv2. So I don't think that the trucking guys know anything about this.
No, but that was more referring to my colleague here, that insurance companies understand well that aftermarket software changes can also cause a lower premium. It's a well understood field for them.
So there's quite a few people want to contribute, so I'm going to move to the gentleman at the back.
There's an idea of actually exploring maybe that's something that there's an idea I'd like to throw in a group and see if there's an idea that could help going forward in the discussion. So we agree that in the current state of affairs with let's say closed secret source, it's not free of bugs. There are issues. What about bringing the idea of test suites that we in free software are using more and more, and having a test suite that is controlled but still open, managed by the manufacturers, that people that want to modify the software need to basically pass all the test suites, and that would maybe not provide a warranty from the constructor, but for example towards the insurance companies would say, look, my modified software passes the official test suite and it provides these benefits, and other people would be able to improve the test suite so that the base software that is delivered with all the normal parts or like that would also in the end have an improved product. Maybe that's an idea that could be presented to both insurance companies and manufacturers, and would allow also people to modify the software.
Great idea.
I think that's a great idea, great solution. Has it been put forward before?
There is a test suite underway in Geneva. There's a lot of work being done there, and anything done there will be contributed back to the open source. I think we'll probably need to involve insurance companies apparently and government agencies, but I think that's a great idea and should be followed up.
Gentleman in the middle there.
And that's it's how we have some things in the U.S. at least, like annual tests. You have to take your car in, get emissions testing, get safety testing, and that seems like a very, in order for your car to be street legal, it seems like a very good model.
Yeah, we have a similar MOT in the UK.
Can we follow up just a quick question? I asked RMS about this, about GPLv3 in cars, and at one point he said that he felt that certification and working with the government would be a good way to go. Can maybe the FSF explain a little bit more about the vision of how that would work? Could it be possible to say lock car software but have all that source code open to some kind of third-party certification body who might review and be able to run the certification and then say modified under certain circumstances, or how would it work?
No, I think the idea is not to try to enforce any of those rules at the level of just wholesale blocking modification under the DMCA. I think that's, the user needs to be in charge of what's on that system in the end, and then society and the government also, there's a risk to other people, so it makes sense that they are rules that have to be followed as soon as you take that modified vehicle out there, but that should be handled through certification based on how the car behaves, just like it is for manufacturers making proprietary software internally who have to pass standards before they can deploy it. So I think that's the key for us, is don't enforce that at the software level. As soon as you start banning modification, you end up with GPS systems that route you by McDonald's intentionally, and you can't change that, because if you can change anything, you might mess up your anti-lock brakes.
So there's just a few people back here who've been trying to speak. I'll try and get around everybody.
I think making the test suites available to the user is the right way to go, and absolutely necessary, even if you don't change the software, because in some cases you're even criminally liable to know that the equipment you're operating is safe and not going on. And I don't think you can, I don't know if there's case law, but I don't think you can know with any certainty when you get the proprietary of the software, even if it's certified, that the tests are even relevant to the safety of the software. So the tests need to be reproducible, and you need to have the source to even know if the certificate is worth anything.
Good point. Gentleman in the hat back there.
Yeah, I think that free software had success in getting started because computers were very new. There weren't many regulations, people didn't really care what was going on. If you were someone who was interested in free software 20 years ago, people didn't have water flow systems at their sewage treatment plant or utilities hooked up to the public, right? They hadn't heard about Stuxnet, right? People didn't understand how pervasive back then it might have been, but especially today. And so as a result, I think individuals and courts probably weren't as affected by this. So now we're talking about free software on devices, as Karen was saying, literally inside people or on cars, which cause thousands of deaths. And so I think there are two sort of questions here. How can we encourage and allow innovators to innovate in this field without having to pay a giant bond or to associate themselves with a really big institution? Because that's the players right now are big companies, big corporations. And free software often comes, and new companies often come from one or two people working out of their basement, the same way Hewlett Packard did. And so I feel like the market is influenced heavily by existing companies and by federal regulations. So the pervasive legal threat plus existing market forces seem to make this extremely hostile. So is there some way that we as a community can change the perceptions of that and the legal threat, the cost essentially to entry? Because that seems like the biggest problem.
Yeah, I think I would say participate in this group and get these issues aired in the papers and that are going to go to the policymakers. It looks like there's an insurance marketplace that it needs to go to as well as the automotive, and we need to try and engage some of the lawyers involved there too, I think.
Sure, I mean, I'm just saying based on what I've heard, I mean, I don't want to make a bet today, but my guess is in 1 year or 10 years, it's still going to cost thousands of dollars to enter that market, if not millions.
Yeah, I say that the cheapest way that we've really made an impact is to support the people who are reverse engineering and showing, in a nice, benevolent way, the possible exploits with vulnerable equipment. Barnaby Jack recently died, but the work that he did on pacemaker defibrillators and insulin pumps, was invaluable. The Prius exploit showing that the proprietary systems are exploitable and demonstrating where in similar situations you might have a better or at least equal experience with free and open source software is probably the way to go. I mean, to me it's so sensational that it really sways people.
Can you send to that?
Yeah. To go on the medical devices, I've run into some issues with the European Directive on Medical Devices. The first one is the question from how far is it applicable. If I read it correctly, then it's also applicable for websites that you can use to see if you have a eating disorder. You just enter some questions and it says your weight delight, you have problematic behavior, so you have anorexia. That's a diagnosis, and as far as I read it, the directive is also applicable to such websites. So I think
that's really scary, because a study just showed that in the United States, doctors use Wikipedia as their #1 diagnostic tool.
So maybe you want those directives to be applicable to websites.
Maybe.
Maybe you want it, maybe not, but when I read it correct, there's the border is really right, and I think many of us are doing things that might be subject to the directive without knowing it. That's the first thing we run into. And of course, when talking about websites, then you have lots of platform systems. You can't all certify. You can't certify for all browsers that are out there that this site works correctly. So that's the next problem you run into. But the biggest problem you run into when talking about FOSS is the directive more or less mandates that you have a very strict quality controlled development process. Mm-hmm. And I don't see how to combine that with the way we used to develop FOSS. So I really think there's some big issues
That's a huge issue. When you look at the process of the automotive software development, they are incredibly organized. They have project managers, program managers. They have, almost one-to-one manager to developer, and they have very, complete certification and tooling and all this stuff. And in free software, in Debian, it's just a bunch of guys and gals getting together and making decisions. So,
I challenge it. I would say just the other way around.
our process is very good, but it's different. It's structured differently, and a lot of commercial software folks don't trust our process.
Well, what you have to do
Hang on, guys, one at a time. Back to no, let's go back to the questioner.
Did I say something wrong?
The issue is not who trusts whose software between the developers, but it's the lawmaker who has decided for one way to develop. That's the correct one.
And I'm going to sidetrack it a little bit. I'm working with 2 organisations in the UK that are trying to do open medicine and share data. So they don't just have the medical devices, the software to deal with, but they're also trying to deal with consents and individuals' consents to the medical records being shared. They're dealing with best practices and how to put those in an open community and to gatekeep those so that the quality is appropriate for people to be sharing the information, not be misled. So it's a complete, it's a great idea, it's a great basis, it's the right thing to do, but on the legal side it's a complete minefield. You've been desperate for ages.
Yeah. How are car manufacturers currently proving that the software they provided with the car is still running on a car in case of an accident? Or how do you make sure that an update for a pacemaker is not malfunctioning, or the software that runs it is not being tampered with by a wireless update? Or how can you prove that your mechanic in your garage doesn't tamper with the software in your car, that the gas pedal or brakes don't work or something like that?
I can tell you with my medical device, I have zero control over the software on my device, and it is terrifying, especially since the technicians that update my device are people who have no idea about anything about software. They have no idea that they have equipment that might have viruses on it, or they don't know anything. They've never heard of any of this stuff, and it's pretty much every time I go to the doctor, it's a new educational experience as well. And I'm only grateful that I have no wireless component to my device, so at least I know when someone is doing, is updating it. So in the implantable devices field, there's no, it's all in the hands of technicians who aren't very knowledgeable about software, which I think is a little bit different than some of the other fields. But I just had to chime in with that because it makes me so angry.
So for me, it must be obvious for the end user. So, like, the software in the car has to somehow make itself known that I know which version. If it's open source software, I can prove that this is this version running on the car. If I have a pacemaker that runs open source software, I can somehow check if there was an update done while I was sleeping or something like that. So I want to make somehow sure that the code is loaded on the chip. Don't even get me started on hardware where you can prove what's running beside the software load on it. But you have to make somehow sure that the software you run on the device you have in your possession is really the thing that says it is.
Yeah. We have 4 people who, 1, 2, 3, 4, who are trying to ask questions, and we've got just under 10 minutes left, so let's go to the back.
I work for quite a large commercial entity that creates medical devices. And we create a very large bureaucracy of chemical risk management, test traceability, and everything going.
Can you speak up? It's really, really hard for me to hear you.
And this is interesting.
Stand up.
I think it's created by a very large bureaucracy. Well, I think that the structure that DB uses for creating processes would create a leaner and more efficient, better process, better risk management, and have more effective testing.
I agree. I've never argued against that. It's the open source process is much better, but this is new for a lot of companies.
I think we have a lot of legal background to demonstrate, like the breathalyzer cases and things like that demonstrate that when the source code is revealed, that in fact it winds up being improved because the companies that are manufacturing the source code have less incentive to make sure that questions that are asked and comments are answered and things like that.
You can also scrutinize closed software against your own test cases.
Yep.
You see how they stand up.
we should consider things like the breathalyzer a safety critical device, right? Not just because of preventing harm to other people, but because you could end up in jail yourself based on the results of a black box that you're not allowed to inspect the source code to.
And in the
It's
United
kind of
States, it varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction whether you have the right to inspect that source code.
But is this even final, the breathalyzer? I think you need a blood test to be convicted.
In Sweden, it is final, and if you own a restaurant, you'll lose your liquor license if you're caught driving while drunk. So,
Gentleman in the tie there.
I think there's an elephant in the room actually here, which is the real life requirements of a procurement officer who, for instance, working for a big utility, who is, Stefano here has been involved in a major effort in getting one European country to adopt by default free software. But the big issue is what kind of backside coverage do I have if something goes wrong with free software? There's no question in the reality of the life of an official in a municipality that with proprietary software he's better off. So I think that is something that is crucial.
Why? Why is he better off?
yeah, exactly. I mean, you already have these things in place, you know? You already have indemnification.
What kind of control do you have? Because there's always a way to shift responsibility if you're only a vendor or a provider. You can always argue about it. And what about upgrades?
Well,
you will need to always...
That's a business decision, right?
Yeah.
That's got nothing to do with software
That's
licenses.
really a business decision under many jurisdictions, trust me.
Why? Why is it not a business decision? You can take insurance.
They will always find a way to make you liable if something goes quickly.
No, absolutely not. I'm really going to push back on that. So I've worked a little bit with the Cabinet Office in the UK. And also in the European Legal Network, we're trying to, and the Open Forum Europe, the policy group there, trying to influence what's happening in Europe in terms of procurement, public procurement, and what's specified in documents. And you can certainly in London, from Lloyd's of London, from brokers there, you can buy insurance companies there, you can buy underwriters, you can buy insurance against open source. But what people are generally concerned about is IP infringement, which you can definitely, and I have purchased insurance for. In terms of liabilities, you might have a maintainer who you're taking the liability from. Because if you're a big utility, I doubt very much you're going directly to a small project. You're probably going to a systems integrator, and that systems integrator, SI, can take on the responsibilities. The IBMs, the aggregators can do it. So I really don't think that's... I think it's defeatist. It's possible, and I'm seeing it done. So there was just there.
Yeah, so I would have two small things. One is another way of approaching the issue about automotive and changing the way of thinking is a lot of these car companies, they outsource their development for hardware and software, at least partially. And I know, for example, one company in Belgium, Alexis, is quite big in sensor development. So if you approach these companies, they're a little bit smaller, they have their own ideas, they experiment with their own things. If you approach these companies and present the idea of changing the way open software is embedded, that's probably one of the easier ways to get through to the companies because they already have these companies. Also, there's a second thing. In Belgium right now, they're talking about having the option for police to be able to stop cars from a distance, adding some kind of hardware in the car. It's still, in Europe. It's,
that sounds really dangerous.
It sounds scary.
And it sounds very scary, and there's no control, or there's no real, like, who's gonna make a decision on that. That's also very scary.
To your first point, I think that going to the small companies and talking to them about open source is a good idea. However, when you start climbing up that food chain of the automotive suppliers, you get to the bigger ones, a lot of them rely on proprietary software. So that's where the real trouble is. I think that the big companies, you know, the car companies, I think they're very interested in it. I don't think they have any problem with open source. They want to be up to date like an Android phone. But you get lower in the food chain, that's much tougher. That's just been my experience.
Anything? I'll just go right to the over here.
Yes, I believe that there's a technical solution, at least in part, for your problem about the peacemaker. At least to know what is this device is doing, because having the source code, provided the source code, you don't want to risk to compile and to upload your binary and to risk. But there was a talk this morning from Luna, from the Debian project, about reproducible builds. So having the source code from the render, you can rebuild the binary, and you could verify if that binary with a reproducible build is the same as the one on your device. So you're sure, okay, you know this is the software, you can control the software having the source code, and you know what this device is
That
doing.
sounds great. Can you talk to Medtronic and get them to give me the source code of my device?
You should have it. But if you ask your source code for your device, maybe it's easier this way than to having the source code and upload your own binary.
Oh no, well sure. I mean, I this is a distinction that I find that is necessary to make when explaining the issue to medical professionals too. I mean, you know, when I want to test the source code, I don't necessarily want to actively test my device while it's in operation. And people say, "Oh, you want to modify the source code on your device? You're crazy." You're like, "No, I want control over the software my that my life relies on, but I don't necessarily." Anyway, it's really interesting, but they're sort of a separate. I'd like to be at the point where you're commenting.
So, I think we have 1, 2 here. We have 2 minutes, so you guys need to be quick.
Okay, quick. I'm having a little hard time seeing the incentive for a commercial company to move to FOSS in safety critical devices. So shouldn't probably be the angle where we're approaching this from more be like the policymakers and the legal, or okay.
A software license is a business agreement. That's all you're doing. I mean, these companies can use this free software and this license and just go and make money. It's not.
We need
it's not a
both.
problem.
We need pressure from the public, and we need to demonstrate that proprietary software is over time less safe than free and open source software.
Regulatory things can also help. I mean, right now,
Of course.
We're really sorry. We're really running out of time, and there's one
Yes,
last.
so just a quick comment. On critical devices, I think we might be tempted to say it would be cool to have the software even if you cannot change it. But I think that's actually can make things worse, because if you think about security, having the source code publicly available to everyone but not being able to change it is actually worse, because everyone can review, find arguably more easily security issues, but then when you know about them you cannot fix it. So I think we should, for critical devices, we should go all the way down and go have all these free or software freedoms that we need, meaning access to the source code, ability to redistribute, change, and so on and so forth, and not stop midway. Because
Well, right now
stopping
it's
midway
completely
can
messed
actually be
up.
worse.
Right now it's completely messed up. Right, there's
Of
no
course,
security
absolutely.
built into my device. It's broadcast. Well, mine isn't, but generally they are, and and the code is proprietary, but
Yeah, I totally agree.
but there's
I'm
no
saying we
security.
cannot
So we
stop
need
midway.
real security. We need yeah.
Okay, so we need to wrap up, but thank you very much to the panel, and thank you to the room.
Thank you guys.